And with the combination of extreme foreclosure tactics and a bailout from the FDIC, One West became a rainmaker for Mr. Mnuchin and his fellow investors. At precisely the same time the foreclosure machine was running, One West funds were poured into glamorous investments in Hollywood. In 2012, One West struck an agreement to loan hundreds of millions of dollars to a movie studio called Relativity Media. In 2014, while he was CEO of One West's holding company, Mr. Mnuchin bought his own stake in Relativity. He took a seat in the boardroom, was appointed co-chairman. He even bought a private jet with Relativity's co-founder. But the company quickly tanked. One West pulled out $50 million, emptying several Relativity accounts, including one earmarked for guild expenses that expanded wages for contractors and tradesmen. Mr. Mnuchin bailed out just before the studio declared bankruptcy. There have been press reports that the FBI has denied a Freedom of Information Act request concerning Relativity Media on the ground that disclosure is likely to interfere with a pending law enforcement proceeding. I have read the FBI background report on Mr. Mnuchin, and I saw no discussion of any such enforcement action in the report. That may be entirely appropriate. Mr. Chairman, I want to continue to work with you to find out what the enforcement proceeding cited in the Freedom of Information Act denial is and how it relates to the nominee, if it does at all. For Mr. Mnuchin, Relativity Media's failure wasn't a lot of a setback, considering the profits that One West's foreclosure machine was still pulling in. The purchase price of the bank was less than $1.6 billion. After 5 years of foreclosures and profits, it sold for $3.4 billion to CIT Group. Now, outside One West and Relativity, Mnuchin spent years as a director of the holding company for Sears, obviously an iconic American brand. He served on the committee that watchdogged the Employee Pension Fund. The record shows that that plan was routinely mismanaged and underfunded. Retirees saw their pensions cut, losing a monthly health care stipend that was enough to offset roughly a third of the premiums the seniors pay for Medicare Part B. Sears also shuttered hundreds of stores nationwide over the last few years and recently announced another round of closures. Once again, showing a truly impressive capacity to advantage himself while others fell behind, Mr. Mnuchin joined a small group of investors that spun off the company's real estate into a separate trust. It was arguably the most valuable asset Sears had left. So as retirees watched their pensions shrink and Sears' remaining workers worry about an uncertain future, this small number of powerful individuals made out just fine. Now I'm going to wrap up, and I just want to step back for a moment to talk about the role of the Secretary of Treasury. This is the person who's going to have enormous influence over Americans' paychecks and mortgages, the caliber of job opportunities they face, the safety and stability of the financial system that holds and invests their hard-earned money, and much more. This is a position that has the power to help reverse decades of yawning inequality that has hollowed out the middle class, dimmed the hopes of so many young people, and left millions buried in debt. The Treasury Secretary ought to be who works on behalf of all Americans, including those who still wait for the economic recovery to show up in their communities. When I look at Mr. Mnuchin's background, it is a real stretch to find hard evidence that he would be that kind of Treasury Secretary. Now, just finally, Mr. Chairman, one other bit of housekeeping. I want to make it very clear that Democrats have in no way been obstructing Mr. Mnuchin's confirmation. We are doing our jobs to truly vet this nominee. We are, in fact, colleagues, doing it as we've been doing it for almost 20 years on a bipartisan basis. And if you have any questions about the fairness of it, ask Tim Geithner about what it was like in 2009. And I want to point out that at your request, Mr. Chairman, I agreed to shorten the normal one-week notice period to all so that Mr. Mnuchin's hearing could be held today. Ultimately, nominations hearings are about hearing what the nominee is for. So, Mr. Mnuchin, that is what today is all about. We look forward to your testimony. I note also we have a couple members of the House, and we want to welcome them as well.